Greetings and welcome. I'm Lillian Payne, and I'm your presenter for Professional Development 326 Trends in Higher Education. Thank you for being here, and I'm delighted to present this topic to you. And let's get started. What we're going to be discussing today are the trends in higher education, mostly dealing with technology. And we'll also have an opportunity to continue the topic with the discussion when this is over. Now, our time commitment will be, I'm estimating, approximately 2 hours, and that's what I told professional development. So let's see how that works out. My resources are the Horizon Report from EDUCAUSE, as well as Tech and Learning, and let me tell you a little about them. The Horizon Report is published by EDUCAUSE, and this organization has been in existence since around 1998. And about 14 years ago, they decided to publish an annual report called the Horizon Report, and it's mostly about technology. Now, this report this year was not supposed to come out until March. And I had set up the plan to teach this or to offer this workshop, this webinar, way back early last fall. So I was going to go ahead and use the 2015 report. And then lo and behold, this past weekend, the 2016 report came out, even though they said it wouldn't be published until March. After reading it, I really wanted to talk about the 2016 report. I thought it was much more interesting and relevant and realistic. I think some of the things they were off last year, although that too would have given us something to talk about, wouldn't it? I followed up with the Horizon Report with the Tech and Learning magazine's EdTech Trends from 2015. And in order to combine them in a little more interesting manner, I decided to place in red wherever there was a convergence of topics. And so whenever you see something red in the webinar, notes, that's something that also they were talking about in the ed tech trends. Now, the Horizon Report was assembled by a group of around 58 consultants from around the world. And the EdTech Trends Report was around 20, produced by around 20 people who were mostly K through 12, but there were some people from consultants in education, people like that, from mostly around the United States. Now, just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to be seeing, that there will be discussions about challenges, trends, and developments in technology. There's going to be two of each of those, and each of those will be discussed in terms of the projected time when we will see those implemented. Also, they were talking about the challenges from the point of view of what's solvable, and that's going to happen pretty quickly. When are going to be a little more difficult and challenging to implement, and then some that are totally wicked, and those are going to be very difficult to implement. We won't see those for a few years yet. So, in other words, we have six 6 of these, which include ed tech, 2 EdTech developments, 2 key trends, and 2 significant challenges. Let's start with the EdTech developments. Now, those developments include um, consumer technologies that we're seeing hobby items, as well as items in issues in industry. 3D video, drones, which is being used in military, sports, archaeology, robotics, which has been used in the automotive industry, of course, for very many years. But first now we're starting to see it enacted in medicine. And wearables, which has hit the consumer big time, smartwatches, fit devices, things like that. Digital strategies, uh, bring your own device. Flipped classrooms we've been doing for a few years here at Palomar. Maker spaces, which is another, in a way, a consumer technology. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Internet technology, cloud computing is something that a number of the ed tech consultants and instructors and administrators were talking about. Learning technologies, digital badges they've been talking about for a number of years. This is becoming increasingly important in industry, analytics, and of course the mobile environment. Social media technologies, crowdsourcing, online ID, identification, social media, of course, your Facebook, Google, online dating, all sorts of things like that. Enabling technologies, broadband, virtual assistants, visualization technologies, augmented reality, virtual reality, prototyping, other sorts of ways in which math and science and other, even business, how they want to visualize and plan and project. Let's begin with technologies that are we will probably see in 1 year or less. Now, at Palomar College, we don't have a what I would say a policy for uh, bring your own device. This is certainly something that we're working on, and we're planning to have a bring your own device and, in fact, a checkout system for smart tablets when we open the new library. And academic technology will have the entire second floor for teaching and learning, collaborating, and I'm really excited about that. Look for that around 2017, 2018. What's happened this year as far as projecting bring your own device? Well, already one study discussed that 42% of colleges and universities in the U.S. already had such an implementation policy in place. Uh, 86% of undergrads already own smart devices. Now, I did a couple of years ago, probably maybe 3 years ago now, I did a not particularly scientific study. Certainly, I wouldn't say it what would be statistically significant or a very robust study, but I found about 50% of the people that I surveyed had smart devices. And interestingly, this matched an Apple study that was happening at the same time, being conducted at the same time. And they also found about half of the people they surveyed had smart devices. Now, one thing that was interesting was 20% of the adults who use smart devices also use wearable devices, smart watches, and things like that. Now, one thing that we're seeing is that with Palomar College having over 2 million hits in Blackboard each month, makes me think that people are communicating with Blackboard through their smart devices. And I see that on campus all the time, and it kind of surprises me when I see students actually taking an entire online course using a smart device. I think that is challenging, but apparently some people are doing it, and they may be missing out on some of the content, but that might explain a lot, wouldn't it? Now, many campuses are already encouraging mobile devices for teaching and learning. Some professors with whom I've spoken are concerned about that in terms of assessment. Uh, how can you control for assessments that have a lot of academic integrity? That's something that we still need to work out some of these issues, don't we? Now, learning analytics is our second issue that we are going to be expecting seeing in 1 year or less. And this also includes adaptive learning. And this is how we will actually profile learners by gathering and analyzing information about them and their interactions. And the purpose of this is to not only build better pedagogies, empower their active learning, but we also want to target our at risk students. Now, Olga Diaz, who is working with a faculty senate with identifying at-risk students in order to improve completion and success, is really working diligently and finding more and more students who really fall in that at-risk category. So it's nice to know that we are, and important to know that we are addressing these issues. Now, one thing they are saying is that adaptive learning is working better in hybrid and online learning environments that are monitored by software. Uh, if we are trying to identify our at-risk students in a face-to-face classroom, it might be more challenging unless we start to actually surveying them and matching it to the profile that Olga Diaz has identified. Now, the Gates Foundation is funding private companies very heavily for adaptive learning, and this is going out into the private sector. Because of this, the Horizon Group felt that really a major challenge is privacy and safety of student data. I know at Palomar College we're very concerned with protecting the privacy of our students, which is why Blackboard is password protected. No one can be in the classrooms except students who are registered in that class, and of course the instructor. And also the whole safety of the student databases on campus, both those databases, PeopleSoft as well as uh, Blackboard, are protected by FERPA regulations, and we fall within FERPA guidelines. Now, in 2 to 3 years, the first issue that we come across is augmented and virtual reality, and this takes uh, into account augmented reality, which is layering data over 3D spaces, and it actually blends reality, versus virtual reality, which generates an environment in on the computer, and it gives the illusion of a physical presence, and it generates a regular, uh, realistic sensory experience. Now, I actually have my students in one of my media classes get into Second Life, which is a free virtual reality environment. And some of them who are very active in gaming feel that virtual realities, at least in Second Life, hasn't kept pace with the quality of gaming. Nevertheless, some of them have a lot of fun in it, and other than being entertainment, virtual reality such as Second Life is used by nonprofit organizations. There's a nonprofit island in in Second Life, and there's also uh, many educational islands where universities are teaching in Second Life. And oftentimes you can't get in those environments unless you are registered. And then even industry, many commercial enterprises have a presence in order to basically advertise. And then organizations such as Manpower are actually holding meetings, international meetings online. And if you stop and think about it, they're saving a lot of time for travel time and expense for traveling. And also, when people speaking different languages, being that Manpower is an international training organization and job placement organization, that people attending a meeting uh, can then listen to the simultaneous translations that Second Life has set into place, and you can subscribe to those services. Other areas are medical and STEM field for these AR and VR, and it also enhances group dynamics between work teams. Other areas of interest of why these fields, AR and VR, are so important is because they are very motivating and let's face it, it's kind of entertaining when you have a little avatar taking you through your lessons or your experience or guiding your group. Makerspaces was something that a lot of people were discussing in the ed tech. So this will happen in 2 to 3 years. Now, when I look around us locally, there's a number of organizations that sponsor maker spaces. And this is where you creatively design, engineer, and use tools such as 3D printers, robotics, 3D modeling. Um, Maker movements include artists, technology enthusiasts, engineers, builders, people with a passion for making things. And if you even look on television, for example, HGTV, Ellen DeGeneres is having a design challenge right now, and they're doing a lot of kind of maker things with to make furniture, um, such as working with metal, welding, making molding furniture, molding wood, molding other plastics in order to make the furniture. Uh, One example, which is quite impressive, and I wanted to actually point this out, is Case Western Reserve University has a building, and it's a 7-story building called ThinkBox. And each floor, there's 7 floors, each respectively feature a community on the bottom floor. Second floor is ideation. Third is prototyping, and so on. Fabrication, workspace, entrepreneurial resources, and incubator space at the very top. And they are preparing their students ready to go out in the world of work. Um, in fact, Stanford University um, is famous for sending out their graduates who are so innovative and they apply the skills they've learned at Stanford and are responsible for generating millions and millions and millions of dollars. And so universities are not just the ivory tower that they used to be, teaching theory, but many are getting involved with very practical applications and implementations of technology. So they so their graduates are prepared to work in industry. Now, in 4 to 5 years, we're going to have expect effective computing. This is where humans can program machines to recognize, interpret, process the whole range of human emotions. MIT has already started this, and they have an automated stress recognition system to where a machine is or a robot is actually taught to recognize human emotion. And we already have wearable sensors and smartphones to measure and recommend treatments. And we have avatars to provide feedback to learners. Um, I keep thinking of Star Wars when we have this, when not only the the robots can communicate and react to humans, but humans can react to the robots. And the second issue of technology that we can expect in 4 to 5 years are robotics. Now, of course, we know in industry we already have robotics, and they've been building cars and other aspects of assembly lines for quite some time now. But we're talking about education here, and education is a lot slower. And this is where we're talking about 4 to 5 years. Engineering, robotics, neuroscience, physiology, rehabilitation, psychology. These are all areas that will be using robotics. And UCSD is building 3D printing technology uh, for robotics for medical devices. Now, one thing I wanted to point out was short term, going on to short term. Um, when we look at in 3 to 5 years, we're going to be looking at learning designs, blended learning. And in many ways, we're doing blended learning by flipping classes, doing hybrid classes. But this also includes other aspects that we're not as interested in at the moment at Palomar College, such as MOOCs, those massive online open environments. Um, University of Massachusetts is has found that they've had an increase of 12% increase in success with flipped models. The Gate Foundation is certainly looking at higher academic achievement in blended models, and they're putting lots of money towards research towards that. In Pierce College in Philadelphia, which is they have some programs geared towards working adults and non-traditional learners, and they found that by using blended learning through in a pilot test that they had reduced absences from 10.2% to 1.4%. And then of course in technology, virtual labs is a an important location for blended learning and flipped learning. Now, redesigning learning spaces is going to take a little more. And we're talking about midterm 3 to 5 years. And this is redesigning learning spaces totally. And learning spaces actually was a topic in Ed Tech magazine. And they were talking about facilitating emerging pedagogies through, through strategies such as flipped classrooms, active learning, project based learning, smart rooms, real world social environments which take in problem solving, uh, polysynchronous spaces such as face to face spaces, asynchronous spaces, synchronous spaces, all intertwined for one purpose. And another aspect which I thought was really interesting was universities are looking for more comfortable 24/7 learning spaces. And indeed, we are looking forward to going in this area with our second floor. And if we can get cooperation with the technology for this area and the furniture for this area, we plan to depart from a typical learning lab with just rows and rows of uh, computer space, but actually places for collaborating and lounging and hooking their smart devices up in much the way airports are doing now when you're waiting for your flight. And EDUCAUSE has actually come up with a learning spaces rating system to measure your rating system. And so stay tuned for that. Now, midterm in 3 to 5 years, another issue is deeper learning approaches. And here we're talking about critical thinking, problem solving, self directed learning. And again, this brings us back to project based learning, challenge based learning, inquiry based learning. And one of the things that's really important here is learning to learn. So many students say, well, they don't want to memorize things, or why do they even have to learn what they're learning? And it's not so much the significance of learning these facts, but it's learning to learn the facts so that in the future, when new issues and problems are presented, that future generations can actually uh, resolve those issues and find uh, the answers and the solutions. In fact, I always ask my students at the end of their online classes to talk about how they learned how to learn as they were in an online class. For many of them, it was the first time they were taking an online class, so they had to kind of learn how to learn in an online class. There's also features such as and strategies as contextual learning and brainstorming, collaborative learning technologies, designing, creating technologies. These are other areas that will increasingly improve deeper learning so that people aren't just memorizing at a really superficial level, and which is of course on Bloom's taxonomy the lowest level there is, and bring people to the higher levels, such as would make then instructors guides, coaches, modeling, that guide on the side rather than the stage on the sage, and modeling inquisitive behavior as opposed to um, the Lumina Foundation, which has a degree qualification profile to where they're promoting that for matching skill sets to accomplishments and achievements. And this demonstrates knowledge using new media and as well as collaborating. Now, long term in 1 to 5 years is advancing cultures of innovation. And this is where we want to find employees being prepared at college, for example, to be agile, adaptable, learn anytime, any place, be inventive, and work with experience based learning and new strategies for leadership. Another aspect in 5 plus years is long term learning, and this is rethinking how our institutions work. And we're going to need to look at new paradigms for learning. Already, we're talking about things like having a baccalaureate degree at our community college level. What is that going to look like? And what we're getting, and the reason for this is it's taking too long to finish a 4-year degree. Programs are impacted, and just industry is needing a turnaround much quicker. We can't necessarily take 2 years on a program. And isn't it so that in the past few years, our students are being required to do an ed plan and take and complete a degree, whereas the industry is saying there's no time for that. We need to get people out into the workforce and prepared with skill sets much quicker than that, which may mean learning a, a skill in 1 or 2 courses. And there is an ease model, and this is actually a delivery system in which it unbundles higher education to do on demand, on as needed, to get those people out into industry so they're prepared. And these are competency based models. Other similar models that match this are online delivery, blended delivery, and online learning and massive delivery. This also includes massive open online courses, MOOCs, which haven't been particularly successful across the board, but under specific circumstances, they are, such as people who are further along in their education and more sophisticated learners, more advanced learners in a subject area, and interdisciplinary communities. Now, let's switch gears to solvable channels. Uh, Solvable channels include blending formal and informal learning, and this is something that private universities are doing that when they get credit for life experiences. What they're saying is that why are we forcing students to take courses for information they already possess? And maybe we need to weigh out and get them out the door faster if they can get informal life experiences and the pursuit of online learning. Udacity and Coursera, who are partnering with Google and Instagram, as well as other organizations like LinkedIn, Credly. They're doing things like badging, offering certificates, and other verification for employers very quickly. And I know we're feeling a competition from this. And while it is, but they're meeting the demands a lot quicker and a lot cheaper than we can at private universities or even public universities who are required to take their courses from in smaller increments. Global institutions seem to be addressing this quicker than we are in the United States. And if you go in and do research with EduCause, the Horizon Report, they're actually identifying Asia, Australia, Europe, who are coming up with solutions to get people out into the workforce faster. So, one challenge we feel is how to acknowledge and reward skills learned outside the classroom, as well as public education, keeping up with fast paced enrollment, technology, classes, rich environments, and skills. Now, another solvable challenge that we should be expecting in the relatively near future is improving digital literacy. And I would like to say we can finish this in the near future, but this is something Palomar College has been working on for about 10 years now. I regret to have to say that. Um, the first group that started working on it had instruments and everything, and they could not get buy-in from the administration or the faculty, mainly because it wasn't listed. Digital literacy is not considered a state standard. And yet, we know that our students come to us without the skills necessary to be successful, let's say in an online class or even a face to face class. Part of the reason this is so is that there's a lack of consensus of definition of digital literacy that impedes policies and programs. And another feature is that teaching with technology is different from learning from technology and learning with technology. Australian researchers also are using Scoopit to develop digital literacy, and that might be something that we look at even at Palomar College. And the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in the US is finding that millennials are placed nearly last in digital literacy with other developed nations. And I was quite surprised to hear that. And Rasmussen College found that 1 in 4 millennials want to improve digital literacy, but 37% of those millennials find that internet safety and they actually found that the internet was scary more so than other age groups. So, a conclusion we have from this is that while it's a solvable challenge, the digital literacy is not just a checklist of specific technical skills, but it's a development of critical thinking and reflection in various social and cultural contexts. Now, a difficult challenge, the first difficult challenge we ought to look at is competing models of education. And one of these features is just disruptive technologies. This is something that both EDUCAUSE and our EdTech respondents were talking about. Um, what some of the ways to do this, and this makes us very nervous, for example, at Palomar College and union members, unbundling existing credit hours and degree programs, increasing and we see we have an increased number of millennials and non-traditional students. How can we facilitate their education? The increasing cost of formal higher education, certainly in the private sector as well as the public sector, is getting increasingly expensive. Increasing the number of competency based career programs by for profits. This is quite a challenge for us because people can go through these programs rather quickly, and they're definitely in competition with us. In performance-based funding, student completion and success is connected to that. Australia is in fun and is looking at Australia is looking at work and learn models. Another big challenge for us that we face is how do we maintain academic integrity as we unbundle this and our programs and have them out quickly as needed for people. It's a concern of us, and with good reason. Another challenge under the difficulty category is personalized learning. Um, this is a term, and probably a lot of these terms we've been talking about for quite some time. Um, but the range of educational programs, learning experiences, etc., aspirations, cultural backgrounds of individual students, this is all creates a challenge to address all these different people. I know when I always teach, and our classes are getting larger, even at Palomar College. So, how can we personalize a class with, say, 40 to 60 students in it? And as I always tell them, that there's many of them, there's one of me, and I will provide various ways in which they can uh, acquire information and skills and knowledge, uh, and and they should take what they can use the most, enjoy those that they're comfortable with, and I try to provide a variety of experiences so that there's something for everyone in my classes. One thing that's important with personalized learning is that it has to incorporate effective pedagogy and include faculty based um, learning. The pedagogy must include faculty in the development process, so it's not just top down, where courseware then could replace instructors, where we have mandates to use technology or instructors need to be trained to use adaptive courseware. Um, a barrier for this is, of course, the lack of scientific data driven approaches. And this has only recently begun to emerge. Now, wicked challenges, since this is so far out, and or just a challenge. I don't know about you, but I know, how do we balance our unconnected lives with other people? That's a wicked challenge, and there's so many aspects to that in terms of balancing our work life with our personal life, our social life. Um, our many layers of ourselves, and keeping education relevant. And we hear of things that, how do we how do we keep education relevant? Now, and sometimes even that in itself is frightening, when they say they're not going to be teaching Shakespeare in high school because it's not relevant for the students. And many of the classics are being thrown out because it's not relevant, or learning languages is not relevant. So these are concerns that we should be having, and not only we should be having um, be concerned about those, but we should be having very important discussions about these topics. Now let's go on to our last area. Have any topics, any questions? I have two. This is the Now You Do It section. We have two questions for this to wrap up our discussion here. One is, what trend do you think will impact your teaching the most, and why? And what trend do you think presents the greatest obstacle to your teaching, and why? So post your discussions in the discussion area of course sites, and be sure to respond to your colleagues in order to keep our discussion going. I'm going to keep our webinar open another a week, so you can go back and visit it, and listen to it, or at least watch the uh, the seminars, the impressions as time goes on. We want to keep this discussion going. And so now we've been at this about 45 minutes, as I promised. And so we will go back to the discussion area and we will see you in cyberspace. Bye bye. Have any topics, any questions? I have two. This is the Now You Do It section. We have two questions for this to wrap up our discussion here. One is, what trend do you think will impact your teaching the most and why? And what trend do you think presents the greatest obstacle to your teaching and why? So post your discussions in the discussion area of course sites and be sure to respond to your colleagues in order to keep our discussion going. I'm going to keep our webinar open another a week so you can go back and visit it and listen to it or at least watch the uh, the seminars, the impressions as time goes on. We want to keep this discussion going. And so now we've been at this about 45 minutes, as I promised. And so we will go back to the discussion area and we will see you in cyberspace. Bye bye.